Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. On episode 11 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we are going to hit a topic that I love to talk about, but I hate that it exists: greenwashing. Like many topics that I cover in my book, I feel confident that I could do an episode on my own about this, but I'd rather hear from industry experts about greenwashing specifically in the outdoor industry, their experiences, how they avoid it, and their ideas moving forward. To help me do that, I'd like to introduce Steven Sashen. Steven is a serial entrepreneur who has never had a job, a former professional stand-up comic, an award-winning screenwriter, and a competitive sprinter, one of the fastest men over 55 in the country. Maybe the fastest 55-plus Jew in the world. He and his wife, Lena Phoenix, co-founded the footwear company Xero Shoes, creating a movement, which has helped hundreds of thousands of people live life feet first with happy, healthy, strong feet in addictively comfortable footwear. Xero Shoes has been on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies for 5 years in a row. And Steven and Lena also appeared on Shark Tank, where they turned down a $400,000 offer from Kevin O'Leary. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax and hemp, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. So thanks for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, Steven. I'm really excited to have you here. Before we jump into the topic, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your experience in the outdoor industry and how Xero Shoes got started.
Oh my, so I'm the CEO and co-founder of Xero Shoes, and that was back in late 2009 when we started the company. And the way it all began, I love that you're the outdoor minimalist since we are minimalist. And that was what started this whole thing 14 years ago when I was 45. I got back into sprinting after a 30-year break, which I don't necessarily recommend. I was getting injured pretty much constantly for the next 2 years. And after a couple of years of that, a friend of mine who's a world champion runner said, why don't you try taking off your big, thick, padded, motion-controlled shoes and see if you learn anything from getting your bare feet on the ground. And to abbreviate the story dramatically, what I learned was A, why I was getting injured, because it was a form issue that I couldn't feel when I was in regular shoes, and B, how to stop getting injured because that form issue adjusted naturally, and that's simply because when you're running with bad form barefoot, it hurts, and when you're doing it properly, it feels good. And so my injuries went away. I became faster. I became a Masters All-American sprinter. So I'm one of the fastest guys over 55 in the country. And I just wanted that natural movement experience as much as I could have it. I didn't want to have to argue with people about whether it was legal to get into a restaurant or a supermarket in bare feet. By the way, it is, but that's not important. So I made a pair of sandals just based on a 10,000-year-old design idea, just something to protect your foot and something to hold that protection onto your foot, which is what footwear was for the first 99.5% of human history. And people kept asking me for more of those sandals, and I was just doing this as a goofy little hobby. And one day, a guy said he was writing a book called Barefoot Running, and if I treated this sandal-making hobby like a business and had a website, he would put me in the book. And I'd been an internet marketer since, 1992. So I built hundreds and hundreds of websites. So I rushed home and pitched this incredible opportunity to my wife, who assured me that it was really stupid, wouldn't make any money, and I shouldn't do it. And I am a good husband, so I agreed with her. And I'm a typical husband, so after she went to bed, I built a website. And that's how it all began. And since then, we've evolved from selling a funky little do-it-yourself sandal kit to having a complete line of boots, shoes, and sandals for performance and casual use that people use for everything from taking a walk to running 100-mile ultramarathons. And we've been one of the fastest growing companies in the U.S. for, the last 8 years.
That's pretty amazing. And actually, I have a pair of Xero Shoes, and it came about similar ways to how you started the company because I got injured when I was training for an ultra marathon. And it was a form issue that my physical therapist could only see when my shoes were off. So it was like a recommendation from him.
Well, you can often see them with shoes on, but they're more
Yeah.
obvious if people take their shoes off and if they still have that same form issue. I did some research with Dr. Or actually more accurately, I was in the lab with Dr. Bill Sands, who at the time was at Colorado Mesa University, looking at his research. And we saw that most people change their gait almost immediately if they take off their shoes, because again, doing it wrong hurts. And for the roughly 8% of the people that we saw who didn't change immediately, it took a very small amount of coaching until they could adapt to a more natural form, and then not very long until that became ingrained and they relearned how to move efficiently.
So before Xero Shoes, you were in internet marketing for a long time.
I've done, oh gosh, I like to say as a 59-year-old guy, I was just a little too old to have been given Ritalin as a kid. So I've done a lot of things. I invented a industry standard word processing software for film and television writers. I did some real estate investing. I got into internet marketing again way back when. I was teaching meditation. I did a whole stack of things between the time I was 20 something and late 30s.
A very well-rounded career path is what I would like to say.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it.
When we first connected, you said you're really passionate about marketing, though, and kind of the idea of greenwashing and how that fits into today's market. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about your concepts around greenwashing, and for anyone that doesn't know what greenwashing is, if you could define it in your own terms.
Well, let me back up and say my interest as a marketer has always been how to give people something that's demonstrably valuable and how to present that in a way that is truthful. In fact, there's a guy who put out a course on copywriting who used a long form sales letter that I had written for a nutritional supplement. That the title of that chapter in his course was How to Market by Telling the Truth. And in that particular instance with that product, I said things like, if anyone tells you this product will change your life, they're lying. In fact, there's no way to know if this product is even working. You just have to understand the concept of what it's doing. And if you think that's useful for your health, here it is. And oh, by the way, money back guarantee. So, no harm, no foul. And it was a pretty radical thing to do. Instead of promising that if you took this product, your kids would get into a better college, your mortgage rate would go down, and you'd suddenly develop the ability to play the violin that you never had before. So I'm a big fan of doing marketing that is honest, which brings us to greenwashing. So not too surprisingly, in the last however many years, the idea of doing things that are good for the planet has really taken off, and rightly so. Greenwashing is claiming that you are doing good things for the planet when at best that is obfuscating reality, and at worst it's just flat out lying. And it's not unique to the outdoor industry by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the energy companies are doing quite a bit of greenwashing. So the natural gas industry loves to talk about how natural gas is so clean, it's a clean energy source. But the reality is, for a number of reasons, including methane leaks and others, natural gas is barely more green, if you will, than coal. And people don't know that. And even the big energy companies, when they are engaged in more green concepts or more green objectives, there's still a lot of things that they're hiding about the reality of what they're doing. So that's kind of the gist of it. And my interest, again, is here we are in the outdoor industry, where you go to Outdoor Retailer or any other trade show, ISPO in Europe, for example, and there are just so many companies who are talking about the wonderful things they're doing to save the planet. And I know from talking to the providers of many of the products that these companies use that, again, it's not as simple as one would think. And in fact, I'm going to cut to the end of the story and say the green movement, or the value of green products, the value of products that are not harming the environment, will only be fully realized when marketers can't use them for marketing purposes. In other words, when everyone's able to do it because these products are available for everyone and they're demonstrably providing value, then people can't use it for differentiation in marketing. And that's when we'll know we've accomplished something. Until then, boy, it's just the Wild West out there.
It really is. And marketing is like a crapshoot for consumers to understand. And there's just so much hidden behind a veil.
Let me use a fun example. There's a company whose name I won't mention. I could give hints, but I'm not even going to be that annoying. That is all built on their sustainability story. But in their first, I lost the word for what I'm talking about their first audit of their sustainability, they explicitly mentioned that they left out the cost of transportation in their audit, which is particularly interesting because they were making a product in one part of the world, flying that component to the other side of the world to make the so they took the raw materials from one part of the world, shipped them to another part of the world to turn it into a component, shipped that component to another part of the world to attach it to yet another component, and then delivered the product in the world's most expensive box. And so the transportation was a huge piece of what the real impact on the planet was, and they explicitly left that out. And that was amazing. Or here's another way over the top example. Again, I won't mention companies because I don't want to get my butt sued. But there were companies who were claiming that they were saving X number of water bottles when they turned those water bottles into fill-in-the-blank product. What people didn't know is they were making the water bottles and then recycling the water bottles. They weren't pulling them out of anywhere. They were deliberately creating a product to then destroy the product to turn it into another product for their marketing story, which could not be more reprehensible. Actually, I'm sure it could be more reprehensible, but that's a pretty good example of the level of reprehensibleness you can get to in the marketing world.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up those examples specifically. I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about, but I also won't mention names because those are examples that consumers don't usually think about, or even sometimes marketers don't think about. But it's often seen that greenwashing is just like a blatant lie, not that it is like something you're leaving out.
Well, let's get to a more simpler version then. So we were recently pitched by a company that is very well known in the green product world, if you will. And I grilled them on what they were doing. And again, they were leaving transportation of where they were harvesting the material they were using to create another material. They just left what it cost to get on a boat and get out into the ocean and come back from the ocean and get on a truck and take it to a factory. And it was amazing. And they got like some seal of approval about how green what they were doing was. I mean, let me back up a little bit. The basic question is, since when we talk about green in general, the biggest thing we're talking about is carbon and carbon dioxide, which is kind of silly because methane is an even bigger problem, or could be a bigger problem than carbon dioxide, considering how much longer methane lasts in the environment and in the air and in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide does. But most people think about the carbon offset or the carbon cost. And so when we're talking about green, we're talking about a net carbon benefit, that we're not putting more carbon into the world than than in the manufacturing, or ideally we're taking carbon out of the ecosystem. And this is the magic question to ask is, are you doing that? Are you not putting more in? Are you taking some out? And show me how the process works, including everything, including, start to finish is the bottom line. And when at Outdoor Retailer, oh gosh, when was the last time we had one that was well attended? 2 years ago, something like that? Well, definitely before COVID. And I think I had this conversation even at a show before that. So let's call it 2 years ago for lack of a better, more accurate calendar. And I talked to a number of the people who were in the business of making green components. And I mean, they're the CEOs of the companies. I've known them since the early days of Xero Shoes. And I asked them, so are you carbon positive or not? And every one of them said no. And that was amazing to me. It wasn't surprising. It was, frankly, what was amazing was that they so readily told me. They said, we're working on it. We're hoping we get there. We hope that there's an economy of scale where we have enough people using these products that we can find a way to get there, either by the economy of scale or new and improved processes. But they weren't there. And that's a critical piece of the story because, oh boy, where to go on this? We like to think that we're helping those of us who are consumers, and that means all of us. But the question is, are we just banking on the fact that what we're doing now is setting the stage for being helpful at some point in the future? And I think there's a valid argument to be made that we're just setting the stage and hoping that at some point everything will become more efficient and more people will be using the products and it'll all work out. But I don't think that's good enough, frankly. I think if that's the case, we need to be honest about that, and people need to say that. And then we need to factor in how much difference are we really making? Because as an industry, the outdoor industry is tolerating a certain level of greenwashing just because of the math. And what I mean by that is I'm chuckling thinking I was at ISPO, which is the big trade show in Germany, and I was on a panel about this exact topic about sustainability. And there was a shoe company that had won an award for having some sustainability something factor in their product, the most sustainable shoe, let's call it. And they were talking about how wonderful they are in the world and what a great thing they're doing to save the planet. And I said something really obnoxious. I wasn't trying to be obnoxious, but sometimes when you tell the truth, that's the way it sounds. I said, look, there's 400,000 tons of stuff dumped into the ocean every year by the US alone. The couple thousand pairs of shoes that you're going to sell this year, it's not making a difference. And again, the argument is, yes, but we're doing the best we can and we're trying to help and eventually we'll get there. Well, okay, but in the meantime, you're not really making a difference, and we've got to be honest about that. Or here's another one that's kind of even crazier. This was in the news a little over a year ago, I think, where what we discovered, I don't mean we as in I had anything to do with it, what we as consumers discovered is that taking plastic bottles and turning them into fleece that then gets put in washing machines, etc., creates even more microplastics that are even harder to get rid of than the plastics from the water bottles to begin with. That was big news for a little while, and then something took over the news. But that's huge news to find out that the thing that many people thought was one of the greenest production techniques we had, recycling plastic water bottles, for example, does not provide a benefit or could be worse. I mean, that's massive. But as far as I can tell, it didn't change anything.
No, those are all really good points. And it kind of becomes really difficult to navigate all those things.
Impossible. It's impossible to navigate. And that's the challenge. And again, some of that is because marketers try to obfuscate reality. And some of it is because reality is complicated. And as a marketer, you can't tell a complicated story. So what do you do? And I don't have anything resembling an answer for this, obviously. I just want to kind of raise the topic and engage in the conversation and see what we can do.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to kind of reel it back to a couple of different points that you kind of touched on, and we'll just move through those. One thing that you brought up was carbon offsets and being carbon neutral.
Or actually, well, being carbon positive, ideally.
Carbon positive, yes. Yeah. Thank you. That's been something that I've always kind of struggled with, that concept of people buying carbon credits. Because is that even really a green practice? Because it's a business. Selling carbon credits is a business.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, Tesla, for example, I read something, so please pardon me for not being accurate about this, and I don't know if it's still true because I read it a number of months ago, but I read that most of the money that Tesla was making was from selling carbon offset credits, not from selling cars. So the question is that a valid thing? And I'm going to lean in the direction of yes, in that it's valid on the global scale. It's not valid on the local scale. So is Tesla a green company? Tricky to... Well, yes, let's say it is. Kind of. I'm now thinking about what it costs to mine lithium for the lithium-ion batteries, so things do get complicated. But to just bring it into the question of, is the selling of carbon offset, the selling of carbon credits, is that a green thing? And my reason for saying it could be is if the net effect, once you take all the companies involved in the buying and selling of these credits, if that is pulling carbon or carbon dioxide out of the air, carbon out of the ecosystem, then sure. Is it a great solution? Mm-hmm. No. But again, if there's a net positive effect, I don't want to kill the whatever in exchange for the whatever else, whatever that metaphor is supposed to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with you. I guess my fear with the carbon offset is often looking at smaller companies, or I guess any company, any size, is that they use it to avoid changing other processes.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And again, the question is it even possible to change those processes? So there are some things in manufacturing, especially footwear manufacturing, where you really just don't have a choice. There aren't valid options. I'm going to take this in a slightly weird direction. So when we started Xero Shoes, all of our products were vegan friendly. And then the way we've grown our business is from people asking for things they need next. We started out as a do-it-yourself sandal company, and then people said, I don't want to do it myself. So we came up with a ready-to-wear version of our sandal. Then they said, well, what about in the winter when I go to work? And then we came up with shoes that are closed-toed shoes, and it evolved that way. And at one point, we had a lot of people saying, I need a leather shoe for work for various reasons. And so we made a leather shoe, and the vegans, not too surprisingly, went completely ballistic. And there were a few who were able to recognize that their upset was because they mistakenly thought we were a vegan company. And I say we're a natural movement company first and foremost. We try to make things vegan friendly whenever we can, but there's sometimes where that's really not an option. And then my favorite conversation that I think I've ever had about that was someone who said, he emailed me and said, well, what about the pineapple leather? And I knew about it, and I immediately replied saying, it explicitly says you can't use it for footwear. They said, what about the mushroom leather? And at that point, they had made 1 meter of it. And I said, yeah, it's not available yet. They said, what about that? And they had like 5 or 6 different things they threw at me. I knew about all of them, and I responded immediately. And finally, the guy's last response was, yeah, but what makes you such an expert? I said, well, this is what I've been doing for a living for 10 years. So, and the people working at our company have been doing it for 30 and 40 years. So we have about 250 years of combined expertise. That's what makes us such an expert. So there's a lot of times where you really don't have an option, and maybe you can do a little better, but you can't go all the way. I mean, for us, part of our green story is that we make products that last longer. So, and as a minimalist footwear company, our products have fewer materials in them, and there's less energy that it takes to make them as a result. And the lasting longer is a really big thing. Our outsoles have a 5,000-mile sole warranty. And so we're keeping things out of landfills that way. So we're not changing the process. We're still using a synthetic rubber, which is not a carbon positive product. But by making something that, I mean, we've had people wearing our sandals that are a 4.5 millimeter thick piece of rubber for 9 years. That's crazy in the real world. In fact, when we approached our rubber manufacturer and said we wanted to make something super highly durable, his response was, but that's not what they do in the footwear industry. And I said, yeah, I know. That's why we're going to do it. So you're right. There's some times where it can be a way of excusing bad behavior, but there's other times where there's just not a better option yet.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot from other manufacturers in the outdoor industry, that sometimes it just comes down to being transparent about the process, because as a consumer, like the example you said with the leather, they just weren't aware of how hard it actually was to acquire those types of vegan leather, or if they even really existed for your
And oh, I
purposes.
love that you said for your purposes, because yes, these things do exist, but that doesn't mean you can use them for everything. A lot of consumers, and I'm going to include myself in this, we often think about products the way we think about the replicator in Star Trek, which is basically if you can imagine it, it must be true. And unfortunately, reality is not that simple.
I would kind of like to wrap it back around to Xero Shoes specifically, and kind of how you have tailored your marketing to avoid greenwashing and how other people can move into that.
Everything that I've told you is what we say publicly as often as we can. We talk about the value of our 5,000-mile sole warranty, and how a minimalist product that uses less materials, especially less EVA, can be beneficial. So like you said, transparency is the most important thing, first and foremost. And then, I mean, in the sake of being transparent, we're launching a product for the spring that well, let me say it slightly differently. We're hoping to launch a product in the spring because with what's going on in supply chain things, you just never know these days. But we're hoping to launch a product in the spring, and we're hoping that we can tell a sustainable story that is carbon positive. And I'm being somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? Or I'm not, coming down hard and saying it's a sustainable product, because we're still testing and we're still making sure that every component in there is either recycled in a way that's carbon positive or biodegradable in a way that's carbon positive, or both. We're really trying to do everything we can so that if we're going to tell a sustainable story, we can stand behind it. And if, just for the fun of saying this, if we find out afterwards that the due diligence that we have done turns out not to be accurate, then the first thing we're going to do is expose that and change the story and tell people what happened, because we're just human beings doing the best we can. And I can't see any reason not to be honest and transparent, even in situations where things go awry and we make mistakes.
And I think that's really important as a message to get out to consumers and then other people in business, because those mistakes, as any entrepreneur knows, is kind of how you learn and grow and
It's
refine.
how you want to shoot yourself in the head at the end of every day, but that's a whole other story. You can't avoid it. I mean, I like to say part of being in any way successful is that hopefully you're smart enough to know how to put out the fires that started overnight, despite the fact that nothing changed since yesterday. And that's only 10%. The other 90% is working your butt off. But it's just, day after day of finding out. Like, here's a crazy example. We found out that the manufacturer of our laces changed the materials. without telling us. It's like, now it didn't make a difference in terms of things like our green story, which we weren't telling for that product or anything else, but they didn't tell us they made a change to our product. And that can happen more often than people know. And it's little weird things like that are out of your control or out of your purview that you've got to just be willing to put up with it, not get overly stressed out. A certain amount of stress is relevant. And then again, if it's something that causes a problem for consumers, just fess up and do the best you can to resolve it rather than trying to hide behind, again, some sort of spin.
Yeah, just tell the truth.
Yeah, that. People are anxious about doing it, and I get it, but I've certainly found that the stress of not telling the truth is way greater than the stress of dealing with what happens after you tell the truth.
I have another question about your marketing that has kind of come up as you're talking, and it's how important is green marketing in reality, or is it more performance based?
That is such a great question. So I'm going to go back to the conversation at ISPO on that panel discussion. One of the points that I said is a lot of these green products are more expensive than the non-green products, and those costs are being passed on to the consumer. So suddenly we have just a bunch of rich white people who are buying the products, and is that really making a difference? And I would argue no. And so there's a lot of people who say, and I actually just read a study recently, and I wish I could remember where it came from. Could have been from NPD, that was saying how consumers, want green products and they're willing to pay more for them. To which I say, who did you interview for that? I mean, did you go to Walmart and ask people that? And more importantly, I don't care what people say they're going to do. I want to see what they actually do, because everyone loves to say they're doing a wonderful thing or think they're doing a wonderful thing. But when push comes to shove, are they really doing it? And I have a sneaking suspicion that the majority of the quote value of green products at this time is more catering to, and I'm using rich white people somewhat hyperbolically, but I think you know what I'm saying. It's just shorthand for a small subset of consumers.
Yeah.
Typically a subset that has more disposable income. And I don't think that's the biggest part of the market. And therefore I wonder what the real impact is.
Have you read any studies about just like market trends in general with green marketing?
Well, on the marketing side, there are more and more people trying to tell green stories, which again brings us back to greenwashing. If they can't tell one that's valid, if they are willing to say that we're recycling water bottles that, oh, by the way, we made, so that they can tell a story, there's definitely been a move towards more green stories in marketing. And it makes people feel good, again, to think that they're changing the world by doing what they're doing, by continuing to buy more stuff. But I think a lot of it really, again, let's say that's another form of greenwashing, is just catering to that feel-good story without being fully transparent or authentic or honest. I had another thought that went along there. I'm not saying that the following company, which I will mention by name, was a greenwashing story, although in a way, it wasn't a green story. Let's call it a social washing story. So in the early days of Tom's with buy one, give one, the shoe that they were giving away was not another Tom shoe, not a canvas espadrille, but that's what people thought. And more, the people who were buying that shoe, who really loved the buy one, give one story, it was a kind of virtue signaling when they're walking down the street wearing that shoe, thinking that other people know they're wearing this shoe that's now putting footwear on people in the third world. Or when they'd see another person wearing Tom's, it was kind of like a knowing nod, like, hey, we're doing a good thing because we're wearing these shoes. Well, the shoe that was being given away, not the same kind of shoe. And from my perspective, any shoe that doesn't allow for natural movement is not even a good shoe to be giving away if you're going to be hurting people's feet by giving away a new product. So I think that there's a similar thing going on with some green product or some green marketing around certain kinds of products, that there's this knowing nod that people are giving each other that, hey, we're trying to save the world. But again, which makes them feel good and makes them buy products, but again, is not really doing what they think. And boy, that's a really tricky one, because once people believe something like that, it's really hard to shake them of that, especially something that makes them feel that good about being that good. It's sort of like there were some studies done way back when about raising money for starving children in Africa, where if you talk about an entire village that's starving or an entire country that's starving, you won't raise as much money as you do if you focus on one attractive baby. And because this is the way human beings think. We can't argue with our evolutionary psychology. And marketers are very aware of this and try to take advantage of that for good and evil. So there's a similar thing, I think, if we can feel good about this little thing, we're not going to look too much past that because it becomes difficult for us to process. It's difficult for us to conceptualize and know how to make appropriate decisions.
And honestly, a lot of people don't want to spend that much time thinking about all those things.
So people complain about, for example, getting grapes from Chile in the winter. Well, the irony is that and I could be wrong about this. This is something I read years ago, is that it was actually not expensive to get, or not causing some environmental damage to be getting Chilean grapes in the winter, because there was these airplanes that were flying basically empty from Chile to America, and they just filled them with grapes. And at that economy of scale, it was cheaper than getting grapes from somewhere right down the street, assuming you could get grapes from somewhere right down the street and in season. Same thing, like there's a great book about sushi and how sushi took off in large part because there was a period of time where the Japanese were flying lots of consumer goods to America on airplanes, and the planes were flying back mostly empty. And then someone realized that tuna migrate to the North Atlantic in the winter, and if they flew the tuna back in those planes, then that would not only satisfy the Japanese desire for tuna, but turned into an entire global sushi business because suddenly there was tuna that was available inexpensively all around the world. It was literally less expensive and environmentally and economically friendly to fly tuna back in airplanes to Japan, have them graded, have them cut up, and then flown back to America than to harvest them in any other way. Again, I'm probably getting little parts of that wrong, but let's not focus on the minutia and just think about the weird phenomenon that unless you know the big picture, things that seem obvious, like flying tuna around the world is stupid, may not be what we think.
Yeah, and to the consumer, big picture often is hard to see because you just don't have all of the information.
You don't have all the information because who thinks about the supply chain for the yogurt that I just had for lunch? Nobody.
So to kind of round out the conversation, I guess, what would be any final tips that you would have for consumers?
Ay, ay, ay. That's a really good question. I think the thing that I would throw as less as a tip for a consumer than an opportunity for consumers is to ask the companies for more information. Just see if they can get the kind of info as simply as possible, but be willing to or know to look one step deeper than you might otherwise think. Like if you can find the manufacturer of the recycled water bottle, plastics, fill in the blank, something that that product is using, just check. I mean, if you're willing to, or maybe what people really need to do, maybe what really needs to happen is someone needs to spearhead an organization that's the one doing all of the due diligence for you. And then we fund that organization. And it's sort of like Snopes.com. If people don't know Snopes, Snopes.com. It's a website that's been around for well over 20 years, all about debunking, or actually not debunking, but looking to see if certain claims are true or false. And they do a lot of research to determine whether claims that people and companies make are true and false. Maybe we just need to finance something that can do that for us. And we have a Snopes.com for the outdoor and greenwashing world to be able to dive into and just find these answers. And then I know there are people who are trying to create an index for how green a product or company is. But I got to be honest, I'm a little iffy about that because I think those are designed to help promote the companies more than they are to help consumers.
Yeah, I'll agree. I was going to maybe bring up those certification processes, but then I decided against it because it's kind of a rabbit hole.
Well, I think we made that rabbit hole relatively shallow, which is that if the organization is really designed, if it's designed to provide certification, there's a decent probability. Well, the question for them is where are they getting their money? If they're getting the money from the companies that are getting certified, maybe it's iffy. Not guaranteed that it is. I mean, we know, for example, that pharmaceutical research funded by the pharmaceutical company that's being researched tends to err on the side of saying good things about that pharmaceutical company's product. And independent research doesn't have that same bias. So it's not that it's 100%, but it's tipping the scale. And so if the company taking advantage of that seal of approval paid in some way for that seal of approval, again, not saying it's not valid, but you got to look a little deeper. And it would be better if there was just an independent organization that was doing this. And arguably, if they were so independent, they wouldn't take money from companies to allow them to put their seal of approval somewhere. That would be dreamy. I don't know if anything like that could possibly exist.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would go because often you just follow the funding and it'll tell you a lot.
Yeah, you nailed it. Follow the funding is a big story. I mean, my gosh, we see it all the time, having nothing to do with greenwashing. But there was a large footwear company did a study that they called independent, and every newspaper that talked about the study called it an independent study. Well, the company designed the study and paid for the study. They just had somebody out of the company do the study. It's like,
Oh,
okay.
man. Well, okay, I'm really happy that you took the time to come and share all of that information because that's a lot for people to digest and think about. But to kind of wrap things up, where can people find more information about Xero Shoes and your story in general?
Thanks. Well, first, I want to say that if anyone finds that anything I said is factually inaccurate, let me know. Point me to the resources. We're all ears. We're trying to do the best that we can in these crazy circumstances where we can't do as best as we would like, or as best as some people think is possible. So I'm open to finding out that something I said was incorrect. In fact, as one of my best friends said to me, he calls me 20 years ago and says, "You know what your biggest problem is?" I said, "Ooh, this will be fun." He said, "You will tell people when they're factually inaccurate or logically inconsistent or in some cognitive bias, because when people tell you that you're doing that, you go, oh, that's really interesting. But most people just think you're a complete, well, fill in the blank with a negative sounding word of your choice." And I paused and I went, oh my God, I've never realized it. You're absolutely right. He goes, see, you just did it. So I'm open is the simplest thing I can say. And the easiest place to find us, not too surprisingly, is at Xero Shoes, Xero Shoes, plural.com. If your computer autocorrects that to Zero Shoes, that'll still get to us. And we're available and findable on social media, either at Xero Shoes or /Xero Shoes, wherever you tend to at or slash. And I know we have some of our sustainability story on our website, but in fact, we're doing a redesign where we're going to be making that a little more front and center just to, because people ask for it and we want to make it easier to find. So if you can't find it, feel free to reach out to us and we will share all the information that we have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Steven as much as I did. I will link some of the resources that were discussed in the show notes, as well as how to find Xero Shoes and their green story. So thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with a shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.